Sometimes it seems we try to do everything right to make the formatting of our documents automated and easy, but we still end up with a few things here and there that we just don't like. Sometimes these arise when we do things, for example, like justifying paragraphs. Remember that the software wants to make all of the lines the same length, and it does so by adding spaces between the words. Sometimes, though, due to the width of the text block and the length of the words themselves, we'll want to hyphenate words in order to get that even line length without having to add too much space between the words. That's just one example of when hyphenation might be used. If I remember correctly, I think I learned about hyphenation somewhere around 4th grade or so. Remember, we can break words between syllables. Does that sound vaguely familiar? I don't know. Maybe we don't teach hyphenation anymore now that we're an electronic society, maybe we don't need it anymore, but I know that I learned it in elementary school. In any event, word processors can apply hyphenation. It can be turned on or off, we can adjust the settings, and we can also use special characters to tell Word when not to break text apart. By default, hyphenation is turned off, and what we want to do to take a look at this is to scroll up just a little bit so that we can see the top of our document and a couple of paragraphs. Do a couple of things here. The first thing is let's go ahead and turn off those non-printing characters because they kind of muddy it up and it's hard to tell what's a hyphen, what's a space, and so forth. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut to do that, which is Shift Control *. With those gone, it's a little bit cleaner. Now the next thing we're going to do is deselect any selected text, and I'm just going to do that by pressing the left arrow key to deselect Executive Summary. Now, from the Page Layout tab and the Page Setup group, we can go to the hyphenation option, and when we click that drop down, we can see that the default is to not have any hyphenation. Hyphenation is turned off. Now, of course, we have a couple of choices. We can do automatic or we can do manual. Automatic is, well, automatic. We let Word do its thing without our intervention, including changing it as necessary as we edit content. And that's really why it's the best choice. We don't have to go back and review our document after we've made some choices. Let's go ahead and turn that one on by simply clicking on it. Now, if we don't have any text selected, that's going to apply to the entire document. And if we look carefully, we can see as an example, at the end of the second line of our first paragraph, they went ahead and broke established at the appropriate place and hyphenated that word so that it wrapped around to line 3. That's the only one that we see in the first paragraph, but if we scroll a little bit further down, we can see that it did the same thing in the next paragraph, where it went ahead and broke expected, EX, and then a hyphen, and then the PECTED on the following line, as well as employees on the next line. So there's a couple of different places where it found that having the automatic hyphenation was going to work better with the justified type. It's very subtle, but that actually allowed it to put some better spacing inside the lines of text themselves. Okay, so that's what we need to know about automatic hyphenation. Basically, we turn it on or we turn it off. What about manual, though? Let's go ahead and choose that. And in this case, we get the manual hyphenation little window that comes up. In this case, what it's doing is Word is searching for places that it wants to hyphenate. It's going to make suggestions, and it's going to let us decide. If the text is later modified, Word only uses the hyphenations that were previously accepted by us where they are needed. So we need to go ahead and repeat the manual hyphenation process to modify it if we made significant edits. Now, we're not going to go ahead and manually hyphenate this entire document. That would take quite a while. But just to show you one example of that, we can work with the very first one that Word found. And that, of course, is the word expected that we already saw. And we have the option to say yes or no. If we say no, you can see that it took out the hyphenation in the document itself. And in this case, it forced the entire word to the next line because, of course, the word wouldn't fit on the prior line. That's the way the manual hyphenation is going to work. You get to accept them or you get to decline them. And as we can see with the next one that it found, which is employees, currently it wants to break that after the EM. But it's also telling us that because it's a multi-syllable word, employees, that it actually could break it between the Y and the first E as well. Remember, it will break the word as it sees appropriate and as is necessary. So we might leave this in, or we could go ahead and say no, we don't want to accept it breaking at a certain point. I think you get the idea about how that's going to work, so let's go ahead and just click Cancel to close the window. And let's go back to our hyphenation option because I want to go ahead and show you our hyphenation options. More often than not, we'll probably let Word do its thing by using automatic hyphenation, but there are some settings that we can work with to make it work a little bit more to our liking. It's actually very simple, but there's one very important setting as well. The first are just a couple of check marks. Do we want to automatically hyphenate the document, yes or no? And do we want to hyphenate words in caps? Remember, if it's in all capital letters, it's probably an abbreviation or an acronym or something, and so you can turn that one on or off as well. That's a very specific use of the hyphenation. A lot of times we'll say no. If we're going to type in all caps, we do not want to hyphenate that, even though the rest of the document is turned on for automatic hyphenation. Now we get to this little thing called the hyphenation zone, and this is the one that I like to talk about because this one can simply be very important. The hyphenation zone is the amount of acceptable white space at the end of a line. The larger the zone, the fewer hyphens there will be. The smaller the zone, the smoother the right edge, but also the more hyphens that you're going to see. Now this works together with consecutive hyphens. So imagine that these paragraphs are left aligned. What we're talking about is how much space is there between the right margin and the end of the text. If the text falls into that place, it's going to say, nope, it needs to go ahead and bump it down. Otherwise, it's going to simply hyphenate it. So as we said, the larger the zone, the fewer the hyphens. The smaller the zone, the smoother the right edge, but also the more hyphens that you'll have. And this is where putting in a limitation to the number of consecutive hyphens can be really important. Now, we're working on a full page document. In other words, we have a good 6.5, 7 inches in width to work with, so hyphenation isn't going to probably be that dramatic. But if we were working with columns, like in a newsletter or newspaper style columns, then we'll find that hyphenation becomes more commonly used if it's automated. And that's where we could say, well, hyphenation is okay, but I think if I had more than 2 in a row, in other words, 2 consecutive lines that ended with hyphenated words, that would probably be too much and it actually gets choppy and hard to read. For our purposes, I'm going to set this to 1. We're going to look over at this paragraph that we have where it has 2 hyphens in a row, and we're going to say OK. And what you can see is because we set that to only 1 at a time, it said, well, okay, I know you said that I could hyphenate as I want, but you also said I could only do 1 at a time, therefore it had to bump the next word completely out of the way. It just makes it a little bit cleaner to read. That hyphenation zone and the consecutive hyphens are 2 of the settings that I think are really important, even if you're going to use automatic hyphenation. Even though we're using hyphenation, sometimes there are words or phrases that we don't want to hyphenate at all. We already had that setting with the checkbox for things that were in all capital letters. But even if Word thinks they can or should be hyphenated, sometimes we want control over that. One that really bugs me is the word email, where it wants to leave the E and the hyphen at the end of one line and put the word mail on the next line. It just isn't right. Well, I guess technically it is right, but it's undesirable in my opinion. In those cases, or even when we don't want a phrase to break apart, in other words, 2 or more words, we can use special characters known as non-breaking hyphens and non-breaking spaces. In this case, I have to try to break Word a little bit and make it do what I want. So what we're going to do is just type email at the end of one of our lines here, and then kind of fiddle with the spacing so we can force it to hyphenate. Then we'll show you how the non-breaking hyphen actually works. Let's go ahead and click after the line that ends in opportunity is to, and let's type the word email. There you can see we have a perfect example of what I don't like to see. I don't like to see that E hyphen at the end. So what we're going to do instead, when we actually type the word, is we're going to replace that hyphen with a non-breaking hyphen. It looks the same on screen, but Word knows then that it can't break it, even though it follows the hyphenation rules. I'd like to show you a couple of different ways to accomplish this, though. First of all, we're going to select just that hyphen, just the very end of the line. And then I want to take you back to the Insert tab. All the way over on the right-hand side of the Insert tab, we have Insert Symbol. And I'm primarily showing you this just because we need to remember that we do have the ability to insert symbols and equations in Word 2010. What we can do now is we can choose more symbols from the bottom. And we're not interested in symbols, actually. We're interested in special characters. So we'll click on that tab. And you'll see that one of our options is a non-breaking hyphen. There are also optional hyphens and non-breaking spaces. So any of these can be entered as we type. We can also see that there is a keyboard shortcut for the non-breaking hyphen. Let me kind of click off of that so you can see it better. It's actually Control Shift and then the underscore. So that's how we would normally insert it using the keyboard. We're going to insert it by selecting it here, clicking on Insert, and then clicking Close. If we now look carefully at our paragraph, we will see that email has gone all the way to the next line because what looks like a regular hyphen is actually a non-breaking hyphen. So even though automatic hyphenation is on, Word is unable to break that word in half. That's exactly what we wanted to accomplish. Because there are so many times that I use words like email, I've added that keyboard shortcut or non-breaking hyphen to my normal keyboarding repertoire, even if it doesn't happen to fall near the margin at the moment. Anytime I type email, it's actually not E-mail, it's E-Control-Shift_mail. You might consider doing that anytime you enter things like abbreviations separated by periods, mathematical equations, email addresses, URLs, phone numbers, and hyphenated last names. There's really a lot of times when you might just want to make that part of your normal typing. It doesn't seem natural at first, but you'll get used to it. If you don't want to memorize a shortcut, you can certainly use the Insert Symbols option when you find it necessary as well, but the keyboard shortcut's going to be a lot faster. Hyphenation is another one of those tools that some may never choose to use or modify, but when we want fine control over the flow of text in our document, and when we want to have some say in controlling the gaps in the white space, we can use the hyphenation tools to do so. Hopefully now you understand how to enable it, as well as how to control it for all of